We're now going to hear from Anne Henderson, who is a long-time campaigner in the Labour movement across Scotland and the UK, a former rector of Edinburgh University, as Shireen has told us. Anne has served as the Scottish Commissioner on the Women's National Commission, and she was, as Shireen said, the target of a campaign of bullying after she called for reasoned debate around the gender recognition reform. Anne.
Hello everyone, and thank you also to Women's Place UK for providing this opportunity for a very important discussion. So just to begin, last week I attended the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. As an outgoing member of the National Executive Committee, I sat on the platform during the debate on Monday morning, a debate on the economy. 5 different motions were moved and seconded, covering many aspects of labour market policy, highlighting the impact of both COVID and the economic recession. I watched proudly, really, as women speakers, a number in senior positions in their trade unions, dominated the floor. This is to be celebrated, women at the heart of developing our policies, bringing their experiences in the workplace to the fore. Our labour movement was built by and with women. Trade union leaders and reps often recall with pride the struggles of women, the Lancashire mill workers, the chain makers of Cradley Heath, the Ford machinists fighting for equal pay, the jute workers of Dundee. In Scotland, one example I know of Jane Ray, a shop steward from the Singers factory in Clydebank, who lost her job in 1911 after organising strike action. Jane went on to serve as a local councillor and a justice of the peace, and was well known for her firm rulings against men who perpetrated domestic abuse. Working class women took on roles as councillors, on school boards, as poor law guardians, long before they had the vote themselves. We can recall Jessie Stephen, who was working as a domestic servant herself, campaigning tirelessly over 100 years ago as a young woman in Glasgow to establish a trade union for domestic servants. The Women's Labour League campaigned for state provision of nurseries and childcare, for family planning clinics, and for decent housing. These have all eventually become policies supported across the labour movement, although definitely not yet fully delivered. How women are treated in the workplace is still a key question to be addressed. And as others have said, this is not only obviously an issue for women in the workplace. We talk about women and their whole span of their whole lives, dipping in and out of work, dipping in and out of the labour market, and working both in the home and in unpaid labour. But I want to look in this talk a bit more detail at what the trade unions are doing at the moment. In the 1970s, we saw the enactment of the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act taken forward by a female cabinet minister, Barbara Castle. The Equality Act of 2010 brought this and other equality legislation together. Also in 2010, the incoming Prime Minister David Cameron abolished the Women's National Commission, and the decision was taken by that new government to not enact key parts of the new equality legislation. I had served as the Scotland Commissioner on the WNC for a couple of years. Our brief was to take women's voices to government. I worked with some great women and also saw the work that was being done by the WNC Secretariat to include women who were often completely marginalised, women in the justice system, women who had experienced serious sexual violence, women in different Black and ethnic communities who had been ignored. The trade union movement I knew and was part of at that time, as organised labour, as organised women, also took it upon itself to give voice to these women. We took up campaigning for better and appropriate conditions for women in the criminal justice system. When we spoke of violence against women, we knew that we were often speaking for those who'd been unable to speak up, and that we were speaking primarily of male violence. At every labour movement conference I have attended, when violence against women is a topic on the agenda, women delegates will also speak spontaneously and movingly of their own experiences. It was, of course, a political decision to abolish the Women's National Commission, which may not have been a perfect public body, but did at least try to provide a channel for women's voices to government, a channel which has definitely been missed in recent years. Listening to and acting on women's voices, what does that mean? For the trade union movement and the wider labour movement, we've encouraged over the years women's conferences, women's committees, women's education and training sessions, and recognition of the specific needs of women throughout their lives, both through legislative change and in developing workplace policies through collective bargaining. There are laws and policies for the workplace. These are laws and policies for the workplace, which are based on the understanding that there are two sexes, women and men. Women are discriminated against in society on the grounds of our sex, and our experiences in the workplace are no different. Sex discrimination legislation was founded on that and is incorporated into the Equality Act 2010. The explanatory notes to the Equality Act make clear that the legislation applies to all services, whether privately or publicly owned. For example, from the explanatory notes, Part 7, a provider can deliver separate services for men and women where providing a combined service would not be as effective. Examples are given. A cervical cancer screening service to be provided to women only, as only women need the service. A father's support group to be set up by a private nursery as there's insufficient attendance by men at the parents group. A domestic violence support unit to be set up by a local authority for women only, but there is no men only unit because of insufficient demand. Separate male and female wards to be provided in a hospital. Separate male and female changing rooms to be provided in a department store, employing only women in a health centre for Muslim women. Women means a female of any age and men a male of any age. Now, workplaces are not exempt from the Equality Act, and provision of separate changing facilities is as important and relevant in a workplace as in a shop or a school, and it is allowed, it's legal. In considering health and safety legislation and some of the excellent work done by the trade union movement internationally and in this country, we're also reminded that the differences between men and women have consequences for health and safety at work. In a statement published in 2014, the International Labour Organization, the ILO, say the following. A gender-sensitive approach recognises that because of the different jobs women and men do, their different societal roles, the expectations and responsibilities they have, women and men may be exposed to different physical and psychological risks in the workplace, thus requiring differing control measures. This approach also improves the understanding that the sexual division of labour, biological differences, employment patterns, social roles and social structures all contribute to gender-specific patterns of occupational hazards and risks. Most trade unions will have guides for their workplace reps. For example, from a Unison guide published in 2016 around occupational health policies is clear. Factors to take into account include women and men have been traditionally concentrated in certain jobs and therefore may face hazards particular to those jobs. Women and men may be physically different and are biologically different in terms of their reproductive makeup. Women and men may have different responsibilities outside the workplace. Working women are more likely to be exposed to hazards like lifting tasks or exposure to chemicals at work and at home because they have traditionally had greater domestic and caring responsibilities. To improve conditions for women and men means taking these factors into account. The TUC Gender Health and Safety Checklist produced in 2017 is also relevant and a link is provided. It is true, and has been picked up by the previous two speakers, that the recurring use of the word gender, sometimes interchangeably with the word sex in these trade union health and safety documents, does cause confusion. But when you read further into the documentation, the guidance is specific and mentions sex. Another major issue in the workplace, is highlighted in the recent TUC report, It's Just a Bit of Banter, is sexual harassment. And another piece of work recently done by, well, continuing to be done by the Maternity Alliance and Pregnant Then Screwed, shows the continuing discrimination faced by pregnant women. We should be concerned by recent UK government announcements that suggest a significant reduction in the number of workplaces that will be covered by maternity and paternity leave regulations, placing still further pressure on women in the workforce. To measure these developments, to speak for the women affected, and to propose effective workplace policies mean we must name women as a sex. If we do not know how many women are in a workplace, we cannot argue for facilities and a working environment that best meet their needs. Workforce planning becomes completely meaningless. It does everyone a disservice. Male workers also have specific needs, as identified within the ILO's guidance on occupational health. And to effectively tackle unequal pay, low wages, poor conditions, we need to know where women are employed. We need to know of the experience of Black women, of women with disabilities. We need accurate data. Recent report on Black women's experiences in pregnancy with worse outcomes for them and their families must also impact on how we develop workplace policies. Remember Jessie Stephen, that young woman in Glasgow, organising domestic servants in 1911 and going on to campaign in the women's suffrage movement, knowing that improving working conditions for women also required a vote and a voice in Parliament. I'm sure at the time, many politicians and male workers in other sectors didn't see this as a valid group of workers to organise, but Jessie and women themselves spoke up. There is still much work to do. Shireen referenced the brief term that I had served as rector at the University of Edinburgh. My time and energy was diverted into rebutting false claims, transphobia. The Students' Union and the local trade unions on campus didn't work with me. As the second female rector in over 170 years, how did this give credit and confidence to increasing women's roles in public life? We could have done so much together. If you are a member of a trade union, and I do believe collective voice and collective bargaining is crucial to protecting our working conditions, then please have a look at the policies that your trade union is supporting. And I know that so around a third of women employed are in trade unions. Trade unions are not made up of the majority of people who are in work. However, collective bargaining sets the framework for working conditions in many, many sectors. And I do think everyone should be in a trade union and should be contributing to shaping that collective voice. But whether or not you're in a trade union, what the trade unions are doing and saying on our behalf will have an impact on your place of work. And on this discussion, try to find out how to raise the questions that have arisen as public awareness of the Scottish Government's proposals has increased. I really believe we have to find a way of honestly examining how the gains made by and for women in the workplace will be affected if the Scottish Government's proposals on the reform of the GRA go through. This is effectively self-ID in my view, and it cannot sit comfortably with the provisions of current equality legislation nor occupational health guidance. Instead of characterising those who question this as hateful, the trade union and labour movement must listen, discuss and learn together. If we do not do this, the movement as a whole is weakened. Contradictions and difficulties are already emerging for workers facing the reality and the challenge of ensuring single-sex changing facilities are maintained, of ensuring women-only spaces in violence against women's services, in respecting women of faith and their need to ensure access to spaces with no males present. And Pragna touched on the pressures and difficulties for women already in the workplace in these settings. We also need to know that as trade union members, our rights to fair representation are protected. Believing that sex is a biological reality is not a reason to be bullied out of a trade union or a workplace. The Scottish Labour Party Women's Conference in November 2021 took a balanced view, calling for respectful debate and more information, with a call for women in their local workplaces and local Labour parties to be encouraged to talk with women in their communities. It's disappointing, to say the least, that this has not been given early serious attention by the Scottish Labour Party, but some work has now started. I would note, though, that the majority of trade union women delegates supported this call too, with a near unanimous decision at that conference. But in April 2022, at its annual Congress, the STUC General Council called for a vote against the motion on protecting single-sex service provision from Paisley Trades Council and reiterated the STUC's unequivocal support for reform to the Gender Recognition Act, questioning the motives of those who raised concerns about the interaction of these proposals with the single-sex protections of the Equality Act. The STUC's submission in 2018 on the Gender Recognition Act reform is published online and the link is provided. The TUC at its 2020 annual conference adopted a motion which had been submitted by the TUC LGBT+ conference. The link is also provided in the chat. That motion commits the TUC as well to supporting GRA reform, both at Westminster and in the Scottish Parliament. It commits the TUC to the statement that trans women are women and trans men are men. It also states that using sex and gender binary monitoring questions are discriminatory against non-binary people. I just ask, given all that we know about women's experience in the workplace, why would the trade union movement argue against collecting data on the grounds of sex? To understand sex discrimination, we need to continue to collect data by biological sex. And I would just conclude by reiterating that we have to be able to talk about this. It's not good enough to simply keep restating that the sex-based rights of women, as in the Equality Act 2010, will not be affected. I've heard that so many times. Many women and men now clearly believe that there will be, and in some areas there already is, an impact. Remember the legacy of those women who built our trade union movement. It deserves more respect and recognition. And that means looking at how we continue to bargain and represent women in the workplace effectively, naming us, recording our experiences. The job is not done, and we need our energy and that of the wider movement to remember that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Another powerful contribution and a very important point that Anne made. If you are a trade union member, please check what your trade union's position is on gender reform. I think some of you might be unpleasantly surprised if you haven't already checked it.